There are people born into families not to be cherished, but to carry the weight. They don't get to choose their place in the hearts of their loved ones, but they do have the right to choose how to leave a place where love only comes when it serves a purpose. This is the story of a woman who was treated like a shadow behind her younger sister, excluded from family dinners over a mere cough forgotten after every achievement because her sister had just had a bad day at school. Instead of resentment, she chose silence. Instead of demanding, she chose to build. For over a decade, she quietly invested, learned, and built her own financial empire, without needing anyone's recognition, without waiting for a word of thanks. But when the truth was revealed, those who once looked down on her came demanding a share. And it was in that moment she realized sometimes the bravest thing is not forgiveness, but refusing to keep paying the price for a kind of love that never truly existed. When Delilah was born on a bitterly cold winter night in Fairgrove, my world was pushed to the edge in the blink of an eye. I remember my father Ronald rushing out of the house as if racing against time itself, and my mother Paige disappearing for several days at the hospital. I was 8 then, sitting quietly on the sofa listening to the ticking clock, waiting for Aunt Gwen to arrive and watch over me. Everyone was worried, some even panicked, because Delilah was born 2 months premature. But what stayed with me wasn't the fear. It was the sudden searing awareness that I had become an afterthought in my own home. From that day on, everything changed. The air in our house smelled of disinfectant instead of baked apple pie. The dinner table overflowed with reminders to sanitize instead of the usual, "How was school today?" And if I so much as had a runny nose, my mother would immediately frown, pull out the already packed suitcase from the closet and say, "Ivy, go stay with Grandma Mildred for a few days. Delilah can't get sick." That suitcase at first felt like part of a game. I even imagined those days at Grandma's as mini vacations. But over time, it became a symbol of systematic exile. I learned to pack quickly, not ask questions, not look sad, because I understood my presence was only permitted if I posed no threat to their fragile daughter. I didn't protest. I chose to excel. I threw myself into my studies as if it were the only way to earn back some sliver of affection from my parents. My achievements, medals, certificates, victories in statewide debate competitions were neatly tucked away in my desk drawer like artifacts of a child desperately trying to prove she was worthy. But none of it was enough to pull their gaze away from Delilah. I remember vividly the day I won first place at the science fair, clutching the shiny trophy as I rushed home, hoping just one sentence, "I'm proud of you." But all I got was a furrowed brow and a question. "Did you wash your hands? Delilah's a bit sniffly today." In that moment, I realized that effort held no weight in this house. Only Delilah's health was measured on the scale. And so silently, I began to retreat, not from the family itself, but from the naive belief that love could ever be fair if you were just good enough. Delilah grew up and recovered as suddenly as if someone had flipped a switch from a child reliant on oxygen tubes and antibiotics to a radiant, healthy girl running freely through the backyard without a care in the world. But the role our parents had once clung to in fear became Delilah's most potent weapon. She no longer needed illness to be prioritized. She only had to appear fragile. A slight grimace, a sigh, or something as simple as saying, "I don't feel so well," was enough to make the entire household stop in its tracks. I was 16 then, just finished with the regional debate finals, hadn't even taken the pin off my blazer, when I saw my mother rush out of the auditorium because Delilah had called to say she lost her favorite pen, the pen I had given her. I stood frozen in the middle of the empty hall, while Mr. Peterson was still mid-sentence praising me and my parents were already gone. Every time I achieved something, a perfectly timed excuse from Delilah seemed to appear, as if the universe itself was conspiring to pull me back. I started to realize that in their world, nothing I did mattered unless it somehow involved Delilah, and she knew that better than anyone. Delilah mastered the art of emotional manipulation with a subtlety that sent chills down my spine. She sighed when she didn't get a perfect score, sniffled if my mother mentioned me too often, and always played the victim whenever she was challenged. Worst of all, my parents didn't just believe her, they encouraged her. I used to think that if I tried harder, did better, they would finally see me. But then I understood I could win a statewide scholarship, be top of my class, triumph in every academic competition, and still never outrun a single sigh from Delilah. Every one of my achievements was swallowed in the shadow of the excuse Delilah doesn't cope well with seeing others outperform her. When I suggested placing my debate championship trophy on the living room shelf, my mother gently said, "Maybe not, honey. Delilah might feel inferior seeing it there." Bit by bit, I was erased from the family picture, not because I had done anything wrong, but because my very existence forced them to confront Delilah's limits, so they chose not to see me at all. When I received my college acceptance letter with a full scholarship, I didn't show anyone, didn't celebrate, just folded it quietly and placed it in a drawer, as if my success was something to be hidden. Because by then I had grown far too familiar with the feeling that if I shone too brightly, my sister would squint, and if Delilah squinted, my entire family would pull the curtains shut. I left Fairgrove on an autumn morning, no tears, no goodbyes, just an old suitcase and a folded letter of full scholarship from Northwell State tucked into the pocket of my coat. What I felt wasn't sadness, but an almost absurd sense of relief, as if finally I could breathe without holding it in, so someone else could be comfortable. 4 years of college passed like the wind, not because it was easy, but because I no longer had to fight to be seen. I spent nearly all my time in the library, the lab, and the dorm, not just studying, but rediscovering myself. No one there knew me as Delilah's sister. They only knew me as Ivy, the one who led research projects, the one who always helped classmates get through exams, the one who could find logic in the most chaotic things. I didn't go home much, just a few obligatory visits. Cold Saturday nights around the dinner table where every conversation still revolved around Delilah. When she got into trouble at school, when she was isolated by her friends, for being too sensitive when she needed a vacation to rebalance emotionally, each story was a chorus of concern and empathy. I, a senior honor student by then, wasn't asked about. Not because they forgot, but because in their hearts, I had never been the center. After graduation, I landed my first job at Brenton and Wells, a small project management firm on the city's outskirts. The pay wasn't high, but it was steady. I rented a small apartment, cramped but clean, and treated myself to discounted sushi every weekend. In some quiet corner of my soul, I felt like I had won, not because of money, but because of freedom. No one sent me away for coughing. No one reminded me I should step aside for someone else. This was a life I had built myself dollar by dollar. One afternoon, eating cold rice and instant coffee for lunch, I was scrolling through social media when I saw an ad, "Learn how to make your money work for you." Normally, I would have skipped it. But that day, I paused. The course was expensive, but if I stuck to instant noodles for a month, I could afford it. I signed up. The online class opened a new world. The instructor, Dave, explained the market like a storyteller, turning complex charts into narratives anyone could understand. I began investing with a few hundred spare dollars, a tech stock that was undervalued, a biotech startup gaining traction. I learned about risk analysis, portfolio diversification, and night after night, instead of watching movies, I read financial reports. 3 months later, my $500 became $5,000. 6 months after that, it tripled. And I knew then I had found my way out. Not out of my family, but out of the role I had been tethered to for so long. The role of someone just good enough to be forgotten. Even though I had officially quit my job at Brenton and Wells and devoted myself full-time to investing, I still kept the habit of returning home every Saturday night. Not because I still hoped for recognition, but perhaps because some part of me hadn't completely let go of the belief that family affection could change. I sat at the familiar dinner table where my mother still made roasted chicken as dry as sand, and my father peeled potatoes with a focus as if it were the most important task of the day. And Delilah, now a sophomore at Claremont University, the prestigious school where each semester's tuition could buy a car, was still the only topic they wanted to discuss. Every story revolved around her roommate who owned 3 Prada bags, how Delilah was stressed because her classmates flaunted Rolex watches, or the invisible pressures that only Delilah seemed to bear. I sat there quietly listening to the praise showered on my sister, and sometimes wondered if they had ever stopped to think about how I was doing. They didn't know I had quit my job 2 years ago. Didn't know I was managing an investment portfolio that yielded 10 times my previous salary. Didn't know I was earning money while they were recounting what kind of sandwich Delilah had for lunch yesterday. I wasn't hiding it, they simply never asked. And that silence, though gentle, cut like a blade. One day, I came home and found my mother crying beside my father, loan documents piled on the table, the ink-smudged numbers as messy as their exhaustion. They were struggling with taxes, tuition, living expenses, all for Delilah. I didn't say much. I quietly opened my laptop and set up an automatic transfer $11,000 every month, regular, anonymous, no note attached. When I told my mother, she hugged me for the first time in years. Ivy, you're so good. This helps me so much. In that moment, I believed that maybe things would change, that perhaps once I became useful, I would be loved the way they loved Delilah. But that illusion shattered just a week later. As I was passing by the kitchen, I accidentally overheard my mother's voice, soft as a breeze. We should set aside part of Ivy's money for Delilah. At least $300 a month. Poor thing, being surrounded by wealthy friends and not having a proper handbag must be embarrassing. And my father agreed without hesitation. Absolutely, she needs to maintain appearances. A daughter of this family must not be looked down on. I stood frozen in the hallway, hollow inside. From a child who was sent away for sneezing to a woman financing the entire household, I was still nothing more than a tool orbiting the same center Delilah. I could afford a luxury apartment, a high-end car, even the fashion store they mentioned, but the one thing I could never buy was a true place in their hearts. And I began to understand that in this house, love didn't come from who you were, but from what you did for Delilah. Delilah graduated from Claremont University with a prestigious diploma printed on thick, heavy paper and encased in a gold-embossed folder as if its worth depended more on its sheen than on merit. The celebration was lavish, held at an upscale restaurant near the town center, complete with imported wine, crystal chandeliers, and a live jazz band. I knew for certain that most of it had been paid for with the money I'd sent, but I said nothing. I was used to it by now. I wore an elegant blue dress, sat in a corner near the drink station, held a glass of wine, and quietly watched Delilah move from table to table like a reality TV star on a press tour. When she spotted me, her eyes lit up, not with joy, but with something that felt like a challenge. Delilah strode over, still wearing that same smile, still radiating that forced brightness, meant to convince others that nothing could shake her. She held her diploma up to my face close enough that I could see the ink still slightly smudged along the edge of the signature. "Look, Ivy," she said, voice dripping with pride. "Claremont University. Not some average public school like the one you went to." I raised my glass and gave a small nod. "Congratulations." She paused as if unable to believe that was all the reaction I could muster for her achievement. "You're not jealous. I'm going to do great things, be successful. And you?" She glanced at the simple dress I was wearing. "You'll just be you." I looked at her quietly, as if watching a stranger trying to convince herself she mattered. I could have told her that I had just closed a stock deal that morning, one that earned enough to wipe out her student debt and buy her dream apartment. I could have said that the apartment I lived in was fully paid off. No loans, no assistance. I could have even mentioned that my latest investment had returned more than her expected first-year salary if she managed to land a job at all. But I didn't. I simply took another sip of wine and turned away, leaving her standing there with her diploma like a shield guarding the insecurities she couldn't bear to admit. 3 months later, Delilah still hadn't found a job. The companies my mother once proudly claimed were fighting over her turned out to exist only in imagination. Meanwhile, the student loans began to knock at the door. One evening, my mother called, her voice heavy. "Ivy, do you have a moment to talk? I knew this moment would come. The loans are piling up. Delilah's really struggling. I hate to ask, but could you increase the monthly support to $2,000? I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling where the light from the pendant lamp shone down like a cold, distant moon. I thought about the sleepless nights spent reading stock charts, the countless times I'd been dismissed for keeping quiet, the dinners where I was treated like a piece of furniture. And I thought about my bank account now sitting comfortably in 7 figures. I sighed, not out of fatigue, but because the answer was already so clear. Okay, I'll start transferring it next month. And right after that, my mother began discussing buying Delilah a proper interview outfit so she can look professional. Not a single word of thanks. Just once again, I had become the default solution to a problem I was never allowed to question. I began to feel something shifting inside me, quietly simmering like magma beneath the surface of a mountain. A part of me still wanted to believe that patient support, even the money I sent, were all signs of familial love, that if I kept giving eventually, they would recognize that my worth wasn't measured solely by a bank transfer. But then one Sunday afternoon, I dropped by the house unannounced. The atmosphere inside hadn't changed. Delilah complaining in the living room, my mother doing the dishes after lunch. My father hunched over a pile of tax documents at the table, and me standing in the doorway like a stranger. Delilah was sprawled on the couch, phone in hand, scrolling through apartment listings as if she were someone with real choices, even though she was living rent-free in a house I was mostly funding. "Everything is so expensive," she grumbled. "I can't live in some mediocre neighborhood. I need a place that matches my level." I gently suggested, "Maybe you could start with a smaller unit or something in the suburbs." Delilah shot me a look as if I'd just told her to live in a cave. "You don't get it, Ivy. Some people have standards." I glanced around the room, the worn-out walls, the fraying carpet, the crooked TV, the wooden table still bearing a burn mark from the cigarette my father once forgot. All part of this old house where Delilah lived, ate, and slept for free, yet demanded without shame. I didn't say anything, just let out a faint smile. In my mind, I pictured the financial report from that morning, the rising profits from the AI investment I'd been tracking for 3 months. I had just made 7 times the amount she planned to use on her high-level apartment. But that truth no longer gave me any sense of victory. It was merely evidence of something else. The distance between me and my family was no longer defined by misunderstandings or wounds, but by a deliberate lack of acknowledgement. That evening, I returned to my apartment, a space so quiet I could hear the soft pop of a soda can opening. I looked out the window at the city below, still buzzing with people chasing after the races I had long stepped away from. I wasn't lonely, I was just living on a different level of maturity. A level where one no longer seeks approval from people who have no intention of understanding them. I opened my email and saw the confirmation of the latest $2,000 automatic transfer. I thought of my mother possibly using that money to buy Delilah an interview outfit or a new handbag or maybe tickets to some elegant concert for motivation. And then I closed the laptop. No anger, no pain, just a chill. The kind that comes when you finally realize that silent sacrifice isn't always answered with love. Sometimes it's just an excuse for others to keep asking for more. That Thanksgiving arrived in windless weather beneath a gray, hazy sky, and with rows of brittle trees standing still, as if holding their breath in anticipation of something about to happen. My mother didn't cook this year. Her back had been aching ever since she hauled Delilah's laundry basket down to the basement the week before. When I offered to order the entire dinner from an upscale restaurant downtown, my mother teared up and said I was the most thoughtful child she had. Behind her, Delilah rolled her eyes so deliberately that I caught the sneer through the video call. I stayed calm, still smiled, and nodded, as if I hadn't seen the jealousy lacing every tiny gesture. That day, I brought my laptop with me. Not because I didn't want to step away from work, but because the Asian markets opened right around dinner time and I was monitoring a position that could earn tens of thousands if things went right. I left the computer charging in my old room quietly running in the background. When the food was laid out, tender turkey, rich mashed potatoes, silky cranberry sauce, everyone raved about it, even the relatives who usually found something to criticize. My mother sat at the head of the table, emotionally beaming. If it weren't for Ivy, we'd probably be eating instant noodles this year. Aunt Helen praised me endlessly, and for the first time, her gaze felt genuinely kind. I smiled, feeling the faintest warmth of recognition I had long thought impossible. But that smile didn't last long. I hadn't noticed that Delilah had left the table. When she returned, she was holding my laptop still lit up with the investment app open. "Since Ivy is so generous," she said with a malicious grin, "I'm sure she won't mind showing the whole family her bank account." I jumped up, but it was too late. The screen displayed the number $4 million in deafening silence. Everything froze as if someone had hit pause on time. My mother stared wide-eyed. My father stammered. Relatives glanced around, unsure how to react. Delilah's face drained of all color. I stood still. No evasion, no explanation. I never hid anything I said, voice soft as air. No one ever asked. And just as I expected, after a few seconds of stunned silence, anger was the first thing to erupt. 4 million and you only send 2,000 a month, my mother screamed like someone possessed. How selfish can you be? Your sister is drowning in loans. We're struggling. Do you even have a heart? My father shouted too, and Delilah, as always, burst into tears. No one asked how I had made that money. No one wondered how many years I had spent quietly learning investing and shouldering the family's burdens. The only thing they cared about was why they hadn't gotten more of it. I looked at each face around the table and realized none of them had ever truly wanted to understand me. They didn't see me as family. In their eyes, I was a talking vault, and now that the password had accidentally slipped, they believed it gave them the right to demand. But I was no longer the same. I had been waiting for this moment far too long, the moment when I no longer had to prove anything, no longer had to endure. The moment I could finally choose myself and choose to walk away. I left that house without rushing, but each step echoed the years of silent endurance I had carried within me. My mother was still screaming behind me, her voice breaking between tears and fury. Cutting us off like this is ungrateful. Family means sharing, but their definition of sharing had always meant I give and they receive. I didn't say another word. I drove through the night, leaving behind the old red brick house where I had once lived, once hoped and once lied to myself that if I tried hard enough, I would be loved the way I deserved. When I returned to my apartment where every corner was chosen by me, every light, every floorboard a decision of my own, I locked the door, placed my laptop on the table, and opened my banking app. One simple, cold, and final click, I canceled the $2,000 monthly automatic transfer. The screen flashed successfully canceled, and I exhaled a breath of release like shedding an invisible chain I had worn for nearly a decade. I sent a short message to my mother. "I've canceled the transfers. Please don't contact me again." But I knew it wouldn't end that easily. The messages and calls came pouring in. First came the rage, then the guilt trips, then the blame. You heartlessly abandoned your aging parents, my mother wrote on Facebook, attaching an old family photo with me visibly cropped out. She posted tear-filled paragraphs about a daughter who got rich and forgot where she came from, calling for prayers from old family friends. The same people who once celebrated my birthdays, who once hugged me as a child, now turn their backs without a question, without a second thought, rushing to hurl judgment. I always knew Ivy was cold. Money changed her. People like that have no morals. Those words didn't hurt me, they opened my eyes. I had lived far too long in a play where everyone cast themselves as the victim and I was the default villain. As I began blocking each phone number, each social media account, each email titled, "For the sake of family," I no longer hesitated. I even called the front desk of my building and asked for my parents' and Delilah's names to be added to the Do Not Admit list. James, the security guard, looked at me with quiet sympathy and asked nothing. The next day, he called back to inform me they came, caused a scene, threatened to call the police because they weren't let in. I thanked him and hung up without emotion. I started browsing apartments in another state. Maybe Vermont with its peaceful hills, or Oregon, where I once dreamed of a house with a garden. I wasn't running, I was drawing a line. They might be family by blood, but none of them had ever acted like family. They didn't love me, they loved what I could provide. And now that I had withdrawn that provision, my presence no longer had value to them. That didn't make me sad, it made me realize walking away from a toxic relationship is a form of success. And sometimes the only way to truly begin a new chapter is to close the old one without needing an apology. I sat in front of my computer screen, the light from the window casting a soft glow on my cheek. My eyes fixed on the real estate map dotted with small green pins scattered across the states. There was no place that truly called my name, but there was no place left that held me captive either. I hovered the mouse over small towns in New Hampshire, studio apartments in Denver, even log cabins nestled among the pine forests of Montana. Each location was a new possibility, a rhythm of life free from imposed expectations, forced responsibilities, or baseless demands. With every click, one thing became clearer: I wasn't running away. I was choosing where I belonged for the first time without basing it on anyone but myself. My phone still buzzed from time to time. Unknown numbers, messages from relatives who sat silently through Thanksgiving dinner now suddenly speaking up as if they had a right to judge. Cutting off your family? Really, Delilah's just your sister? How can you be so cruel? Your parents are old now, Ivy. I didn't respond, not because I couldn't, but because I no longer needed to. I had said everything that needed to be said through action. Sometimes silence is the clearest answer. Inside me now was no longer rage, no longer gnawing pain, only a quietness deep and solid like bedrock beneath my feet. A kind of peace paid for with years of silence, patience, and hurt. I thought back to the moment Delilah opened my laptop in the middle of dinner, to the look in my mother's eyes, shifting from shock to fury, to every word accusing me of being selfish, while they had lived for years on the money I sent. I thought about the photo my mother posted online with a teary caption about a daughter who lost her humanity. And I thought about myself. Ivy Caldwell. The girl once labeled too cold, too quiet, too modest to be heard. And yet, I was the one who built a life they couldn't imagine, couldn't control, and now could no longer access. I chose a small apartment on the outskirts of Asheville, a window facing the mountains. Not luxurious, not extravagant, but just right for a new beginning. As I signed the lease, I didn't feel the thrill of landing a huge return, nor the ache I once felt sending money back home. I felt only one thing: ownership. No one could call me selfish for refusing to be used anymore. No one had the right to demand my sacrifice for the sake of preserving a family image. I had tried long enough to hold on to something that should have been love, but if that love only existed when I paid for it, then it wasn't family. It was a transaction. and now I had closed that account. Permanently. Not everyone born into the same bloodline will understand your worth. Sometimes family isn't where you grow up, it's where you learn to stand up and walk away. Ivy chose to leave, not because she was cold, but because she was strong enough to say no to an injustice that had gone on too long. And in that journey, she lost nothing but false attachments. If you've ever been underestimated, ever treated as the backup option in your own home, remember this. You have the right to draw the line. You have the right to choose yourself again. Follow the channel for more raw, powerful stories where those once cast aside find their way back to themselves, not through revenge, but through awakening. And if you've been living in silence, maybe now is the time to speak.